Welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, it's been so very long since we last had a guest on, but we're actually bringing one on to defend this terrible movie. Delia, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
What an introduction. What an incredibly loaded introduction.
You're really setting me up to fail in some ways. And I mean, I know you, so I appreciate it, but
I control the framing of the podcast, and I just want everyone to know how this is going to go.
Yeah, you're setting me up in a very, antagonistic way right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's anything that you should know about Beating a Dead Horse is that when we have a guest on, we don't listen to them and instead just mercilessly beat down their opinions until they submit to what we think is correct. So
cool.
Well, Sean, I don't know what you're talking about because I'm here for special topics in Star Wars, why Attack of the Clones is good, actually. I've got my pen, I've got my sheet of paper, I'm ready for the exam. I'm ready to learn because this is not a position I would have ever come to on my own.
I mean, that's fair, but also you're wrong. Because I'm right. My opinions are right. They're good and they're right. You can have your own opinions, but I want you to know mine are correct objectively.
And that's the way to do it. That's the way you got to go about it. Every opinions are subjective. Everyone's got them, but everyone else is wrong anyway.
Exactly.
So, Delia, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us why you're here. Tell us anything other than the fact that we have already started off by putting you on the back leg.
Right. So a few weeks ago, you guys did The Phantom Menace, and when that episode dropped, I immediately texted you, Sean, hey, how dare you? How dare you record this podcast without me?
My mom said the same thing, by the way. My mom, no joke, my mom is mad that you are here and she is not.
I mean, I feel for her. Because by rights, she should have been on that episode. And just like by rights, I am on this episode. Because I fought for myself. But yeah, so Sean has had a front row seat to my spiral into George Lucas's brainworms over the past 10 months. Because I want to preface where I'm coming from is I did not interact with the Star Wars franchise until I was last year, however, how old was I last year? 28 years old. So I spent 28 years of my life being this is not for me. I don't get this reference. I refuse to get this reference. And then
the number of times that in conversation, I'll just casually make a small Star Wars reference, and Delia and or Sam would look at me and just go, "No one understands that reference."
Well, okay. For 10 years, Sam and I's running joke is whenever someone tries to make a Star Wars reference in front of us, we go, "I don't get that reference." And this went on for all of our high school. Do you know how many people in my life have tried to get me to watch Star Wars and who I have just vehemently been no, I'm not going to. For one, Sam and I were in the basement of a friend of ours in high school, and he's a huge Star Wars fan. And he was like, "You need to watch this movie." And so he put on A New Hope, and she and I both immediately fell asleep out of self-defense. We literally, I think we both willed ourselves to sleep so that we would not have to watch it. And then when I started dating my now husband in high school, one of our first real dates was he made me watch The Phantom Menace in his basement. God. And I was so bored, maybe 15 minutes in, that I resorted to oral sex to get out of it. And that's a true story. And that's a true story, which is why you should have had me on the episode for The Phantom Menace, because that's a true story about me.
That's amazing. Oh my God.
So to say that I resisted this franchise is, I think, an understatement.
You told me that story of why you should have been on episode. That story is what sold me on bringing you on for episode 2. And at the time, I was standing when you told me this story. I was standing on a street corner in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, holding a mason jar full of moonshine and pickles, and sobbing. I was laughing so hard. People were avoiding me because they thought I was a lunatic. It is such a good fucking story.
Yeah, and to be clear, Sheehan probably would not appreciate me both telling you that story via text and now saying it on your public podcast
for the world to hear. Well, this is just even more amazing because like I already like was prepped with the question. So like what finally got you to change your mind? Now, like after what epic lengths you went to avoid it, I simply must know.
So I mean, the honest answer is I watched the second season of The Mandalorian and got sucked into it. Like, I watched the first season last year when it aired, and it was like, this is a nicely done, like, season of television. Like, I was like, okay, This is watchable, right? Like, it's well put together, it's well paced, and the soundtrack's great, the casting is great. And I finished watching, I was like, yeah, I'd watch a second season of that. And then the second season started airing. I was like, oh no, I'm very invested in this somehow. And then as I was telling Sean before this, like I then like systematically started absorbing Star Wars content. Like each step along the way, I was like, I shouldn't be doing this. I told myself, I was like, I shouldn't be watching this. This isn't who I am. And then, but I kept doing it. And so I watched obviously the original trilogy, and then I watched episode 1. I watched all of the Clone Wars, episode 1, episode 2, all of the Clone Wars, episode 3. I watched Solo, I watched Rogue One, I watched all of Rebels. I went back and rewatched the original trilogy, rewatched all of The Mandalorian, and here we are now. That's where I stopped because obviously I can't watch the sequel trilogy because I know it's going to make me super upset. So
yeah,
a real American.
Be sure when you do though to go on Twitter and reignite that debate.
I mean, I told Sean I'll finally watch the sequel trilogy like for his birthday as a birthday gift, and then I'll go and I'll like validate to his face all of his opinions about it. I'm sure, and that'll be my present to him.
That is not a present. Episode 9 puts me in such a furor that I really think it would be the worst. It would be the worst birthday of my life.
It'll be cathartic for you when I spout all of the same opinions you have about it and like completely validate all of your opinions. Right.
See, now that you're saying this, I kind of hope the opposite happens, and you're like, "Oh, I loved Rise of Skywalker, but man, that Last Jedi movie, that was real fucking horrible." So sitting in his sad throne.
It's not possible because I have a blood feud with J.J. Abrams, so it's not possible.
That's fair.
But yeah, so I am now, unfortunately, incredibly invested in Star Wars. I have been for like 10 months. I can't stop. And in preparation for this episode, I rewatched Attack of the Clones like 3 times and even read the novelization of the movie. So here I am. I'm here now to defend my opinion that, which is right, that Attack of the Clones is my favorite Star Wars movie to watch. Hands down.
Like, not just Attack of the Clones is good, actually, but Attack of the Clones is the best, actually.
Attack of the Clones is not good, quotation marks. Like,
all right.
There are almost no Star Wars movies that are good, but my position is Attack of the Clones is my favorite Star Wars movie to watch and rewatch.
You know,
that's still an insane take, just to be clear.
It's funny because
correct.
like I have to offer myself up to the public with egg on my face now, because coming in I had said ooh, I don't know, Chief, Attack of the Clones, I think that's the worst one by a country mile, even counting, the Disney movies. I gotta walk that statement back after watching it again, because it is still full of that George Lucas insanity that the sequels are lacking, and by default it's more interesting because of it.
Yeah, the prequel trilogy is bad, right? Objectively they are not good. They're not well put together movies.
Yes.
That's clear. All three of them by and large are not good movies in terms of coherency or pacing or any of that, obviously. What they are though is pure, unadulterated, unfiltered mind garbage straight from George Lucas's mouth, right? They were here, George Lucas, have 3 whole movies, and each of them can be over 2 hours long, which is already a crime, and you can do whatever you want to do with them as long as they have Darth Vader at the end. And he was cool, and then he vomited a bunch of stuff. And we were yay, yum, yum, At least I was. And again, I have no nostalgic attachment to this franchise. So
that's the key. That's what I found most interesting, is that the prequels are good, actually, is not that uncommon of a take these days, because people like me and Sean who did watch them when we were little kids, we're all grown up now, and a lot of people are coming in hot with those nostalgia takes. Lots of prequel defense, especially, and I think rightfully so, especially in response to the ways that the Disney movies are fucking boring.
Yeah.
But that was the wrinkle that I didn't take much convincing, but when Sean was Attack of the Clones is Delia's favorite Star Wars movie, she also did not watch them growing up. I'm all right, I'm strapped in, I'm here for it.
It's just so I think Sean can attest that I don't watch a ton of movies. When I am going into a movie going experience, it's mostly I am here to turn my brain off and enjoy usually some probably superhero flavored, nonsense of the week kind of thing. That's generally my thing. Unfortunately, I am bought into Disney's bad stuff. Unfortunately, I'm invested in the Bad Mouse and all of its properties. Mostly.
This is why the most recent movie that the two of us have watched together was The Green Knight, obviously.
I mean, that was literally the first actual movie I've watched in maybe all year, but and I could talk all about The Green Knight and how much I like that, but that's not this podcast.
I still haven't seen it. I still need to watch it.
It's great.
I got to do that.
It's
left me. Just a quick tangent on this, because we did not talk about it when it ended.
Okay. So Sam and Sean came over to our house, and all 4 of us sat in the dark and watched this movie, basically completely silent throughout the entire 2 hours. And then once it was over, they were just okay, it's time to go home, because it was 10:30. And so we had no discussion about what had happened in it.
The vibe afterwards.
The vibe afterwards was dead silence, but my dead silence was I was fully riding the waves of it.
I was in the middle of trying to process how I felt about it, because I was dealing with a ton of emotion coming off of that movie. I'm I don't know what the fuck is going on here. I just I'm not in a position to talk about this yet. I don't know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. I just need to go. I just gotta leave. I gotta go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, again.
And so we all left in silence.
I've heard comparisons with that movie to people were oh, people were confused and didn't something like 2001: A Space Odyssey when it came out. But that was pretty much exactly my experience. I think that's the reason that episode, Sean, ended up being so heavy, was that I had just finished watching that right as we were about to record. I was monkey, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a heavy movie.
I will say, to continue the tangent, I do think that the weakness of that movie is that it's very much helped if you have some background knowledge of the poem that it's based on. If you have like some context for that, then it makes more sense because it's very referential. And so I understand if you're just watching it like straight and you have like absolutely zero knowledge of like Arthurian legends, of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in particular, that it's like, it is a very trippy experience. Like Sheehan that night, right before I went to bed, he was like, I don't know, man. I don't know what that was. He was like, I was not prepared to watch that.
Yeah, that's the biggest vibe I got from it, because like I did have no familiarity with Gawain and the Green Knight. Like The Sword and the Stone is one of my favorite books. That's the classic one, correct? Like that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, I like that book a whole hell of a lot. But like, wow, I was not prepared for what that was. But the thing that braced me for it was that it was an A24 film. So I'm like, I know their vibe. I know what I'm getting into. It's going to be weird, trippy, heady. Let's fucking go.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people I know went into that film expecting like an action romp and like, no.
It was Dev Patel being super horny, super sad, and he was just wet the entire movie. He was just, he's like fully drenched the entire movie. And it's great. It was a great experience for me personally.
There's our mini review of The Green Knight.
Wait, I've got one last meme about The Green Knight. I've got a bounty about The Green Knight.
Oh, God.
Someone make me a version of The Green Knight, but have like After Effects, like do like a deep fake of Knuckles the Echidna's face over Dev Patel, because in Sonic and the Black Knight, where Sonic travels into the Arthurian books, the Gawain is portrayed by Knuckles the Echidna.
Oh my God. We left and Sam asked me if there was a relation to Sonic and the Black Knight, and I'm like, no, there's no way. There's no way. There is. Fuck me running.
All right. So we need.
Yeah, we need to. Okay, that was like a full 5-minute diversion. Okay, one last thing is that that day when Sam and Sean were over and we watched that, we also watched Attack of the Clones before that, and weirdly we accidentally did a double feature of Joel Egerton because he's in both those movies.
Oh, is he? He's in Attack of the Clones? Who is he in that?
He's Owen Lars.
That's why he looks so familiar. Okay. Yeah.
Really hoping you were going to say
Owen.
Dexter Jetster, but
That would have been amazing.
Of course, no, please do not skip ahead to my whole treatise on Dex.
oh my
Wait,
God.
we have one of those?
Oh my God.
Listen.
I do.
Well, listen, because I was just saying to Sean, is that like people make fun of Dexter Jetster, rightfully so. However,
I love him.
However, like I remember I first saw this movie when I was like 7 years old. As I've stated many times, like, you know, I was a wee lad when these movies were coming out. My mom would take me out of school to see them because she was such a big Star Wars fan. And Dexter Jetster, people are always point to him as like a Jar Jar Binks, but you know what? I've seen hundreds. I've seen hundreds of movies over the course of my life, perhaps even thousands at this point. I've forgotten most of them. I have never forgotten Dexter Jetster from when I first laid eyes on him at 7 years old.
That is such a great segue because my main argument for why Attack of the Clones still fucking slaps is that, like, it is so wild, right? Like, this is a movie that could not be made today in any capacity. It could just not happen. It's not possible. But like fully in the middle of that movie, Obi-Wan just goes off and like goes to a 1950s diner and meets up with an Italian-American alien. And then like Greedo is in the background, and like you don't get that. You don't get that experience in the modern cinema.
So if you read the novelization, you know, you are actually the person asked, does the novelization shed any more light on how the fuck Obi-Wan knows Dexter Jetster of all people, and why the fuck Dexter Jetster of all people knows about this top secret cloning planet that even the Jedi don't?
He's a very well-traveled informant. That's it. There's literally nothing else to it. He's just there. Like, Dex is there. He's someone that Obi-Wan knows. And the only thing that makes it stand out, really, is that other than that, there's no like indication in these movies that like the Jedi interact with normal people in this universe.
I've always thought about that. Yeah.
It's literally it's the only example of like a Jedi actually having a normal conversation with like a person who lives in this universe. And also, coincidentally, it's the happiest that Obi-Wan looks in this in the entire trilogy.
It's funny because like that is not that's I think that's one of the reasons the scene always stuck out to me. Like even as a kid, I'm like, wait, Obi-Wan has friends?
Yeah, he's so happy to see his friend.
I also love the idea, like, you know, just a well-traveled forward. I love the idea that there's a whole series of like Indiana Jones Uncharted adventures starring Dexter Jetster as he like travels to different planets in search of treasure.
It's actually a great example of like there is so much more to this universe that George Lucas, I mean, it's implied that he gave it some thought. He probably didn't, but because we know that George Lucas kind of just like made all of this up as he went, like on the fly. Like he's not actually super interested in like nuanced and detailed world building. He's interested in like broad stroke stuff, but it's like just one of many things about this universe that makes it interesting, especially this time period where you see these glimpses of this very big, very, you know, populated world outside of, you know, Jedi, Sith, whatever. And that's fascinating about this time period. Like there's a whole lot of stuff going on. And it's also like one of these interesting glimpses into Coruscant, which is supposed to be a huge, you know, just a gigantic ass planet city with like 1 trillion people on it, but we never see anyone else on it, right?
Yeah. Well, because that was actually one of my favorite, probably my favorite scene in the movie. Like, you know, approaching on. There's a lot of parts of the movie where I'm like cackling in like a Tommy Wiseau way. A lot of Anakin's like romance dialogue is just a hoot in that light. But like the like city chase where they're hunting for bounty hunter Bug Girl.
Zamwizel.
Her name is Zam. Get it together.
Zamwizel, yes.
Well,
I knew that one.
Listen, I've only got room in my heart for one person, one NPC from that scene, and it's definitely Elon Sleaze-Bagano who tries to sell Obi-Wan
Elon Sleaze-Bagano.
Also, she's not a bug person, she's a shapeshifter.
She's a shapeshifter.
She's a bug person because she tries to kill Padme with bugs. Excuse me.
At that point, she's just Gonta from Danganronpa V3. Come on.
But no, like I actually do, like for that reason, like that's definitely one of those scenes where it's like, man, you know, George Lucas cannot write his way out of a paper bag.
No.
But this is like a, you know, this is the sort of thing you don't see in the sequel trilogy. Like we're going to have like a city nightlife, like cyberpunky looking area that we're going to adventure in for a bit.
For me, objectively, the prequel trilogy is fascinating because, I mean, obviously it's interesting because it is literally this huge 1,000-year civilization on the brink of its literal collapse. And that's fascinating, right? Like, this is a society which is falling apart actively on screen, and that's what it's meant to be showing. I don't know that it effectively does that, but
I do need to just really quick, you told a story that Sheehan, you know, might regret having you tell at some point, but I do need to take this moment to just say, in his defense, that's what Dune is about, so maybe you should read Dune. I know he's really into Dune. I'm just trying to bat for him here a little bit.
I know, but as I've said, I have spent the last year during quarantine absorbing this universe. I also was briefly really into Lord of the Rings for a while last year and The Witcher, and that's like as much fantasy lore as I can stuff into my brain at the moment. And if I try and read Dune, I will lose some like major motor functions.
Say that's a lot.
For sure.
You chose some deep pools.
This is what I do, probably because I have like undiagnosed ADHD. I don't know, but probably. But like I just hyper fixate on some garbage that some old man made. And
well, the problem is I was like, when you were describing how and why you got into Star Wars, I was shooketh because like I was hearing basically everything you were saying was for me, but with Dragon Ball Z, which I now cannot shut the fuck up about. and is 1,000 times stupider than Star Wars. Already not the smartest franchise.
I do want to segue us back in really quick and talk a little bit more about that city chase scene, just because Delia and I, while we were watching this movie, had a brief discussion about this, and this is just something less story, less lore, less world building, but just more on George Lucas as a director, is that he is really, really good, at least in the first two movies. I haven't seen the third one in a long time, but like his action sequences with vehicles are really, really good. And in my mind, it's because he can pick up two cars and go new with each other and make them do a thing that's actually cool. But so many of the actual combat sequences, especially in Attack of the Clones, are really fucking boring. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that, some of them, I think part of that has to do with the like CGI. And to be fair, I think a lot of the CGI for 2002 still looks pretty good. But then there are definitely parts where like the Obi versus Jango Fett fight.
Yeah, it's a terrible fight.
Yeah,
it's a terribly choreographed fight. And again, like I think we should like just list off all the things that are bad about this movie because there are a lot. Like, okay,
well, that seems. Let's dive into spoilers before we get into that because that's going to continue for a bit now. And this
that's gonna be a big bulk of this conversation.
So before we do, as always, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. Tell a friend about us. It's the only way we grow. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Jackson has a book, Kelly is Unbreakable, available on Amazon. Go order it. Next week, we're going to continue down our blockbuster weeks to the sequel and talk about what should have been the movie of the 2000s, The Dark Knight, and its sequel, right? Yeah. All right, cool. I'm fucking up right here. Don't worry about it. It's all staying in the edit. I'm a fucking monster. So in the 2000s, the actual highest grossing film was The Dark Knight, but we already talked about it. So instead we talked about Shrek 2, which was the second highest grossing film. So this week we're going to talk about the sequel to The Dark Knight and talk about The Dark Knight Rises. There I did it, except I still fucked up and said this week. That's next week happening. Is there anything else we want to say, or can we get into spoilers so I can shut the fuck up?
Wait. Before we move on, while we're still in the chill zone, Delia, do you have anything you want to plug while you're here?
Absolutely not.
All right. I just wanted to double check. Sometimes our guests have something they want to plug. So
all I do, I'm not kidding, is read and write Star Wars fan fiction at this point. This is my entire life. Do
you want to plug like your AO3 account?
No,
I don't know if that's something, we're ready to share.
You don't understand fandom, Sean.
I don't. Listen, I am here to try and offer you like opportunities. If you don't want to take them, that's perfectly fine. I figured you'd say no, but
no,
I'd be a bad host if I didn't offer.
If anyone finds my fan fiction, no, you fucking didn't, and you will not talk to me about it. Blanket policy. Don't talk to me about stuff I post online.
All right. Well, listen, Delia, what's bad about Star Wars Episode 2?
I mean, so fucking much. You guys, I read the novelization, right? And let me tell you, the novel has 4 full chapters before where this movie actually starts.
That's amazing.
Like, there are 4 full chapters at the beginning of this book with, like, context, with backstory, and so much of it is what is missing from this film, which is, like, Padme's perspective, some scenes with Shmi and her abduction, like, a couple of, like, set up scenes with Anakin and Obi-Wan before like their whole, assassination mission starts. Basically all of like the character work that should have happened on screen but just simply did not. No context.
Because the most egregious one is that I think actually, like, at least this is the one that jumped out to me the most watching it, was Count Dooku, because Christopher Lee completely squandered here.
Absolutely.
Because he's great, and like everyone sort of like memes about Count Dooku because Darth Maul's got like a cool fight and he's got a cool face, and obviously like Sidious and Vader are like fucking iconic, and Kylo Ren's really popular, but like Dooku's like kind of the runt of the litter despite being played by Christopher Lee, and a lot of that is just because he shows up and it's like, who the fuck are you?
And he doesn't show up for halfway of the movie.
Yeah, it's like who are you? And like Christopher Lee is such an icon and like a literal war hero, and like and like he's this very statuesque kind of Shakespearean figure. And he comes in this movie and does fucking nothing. And then in the next movie, he just kind of dies. And it's just, it's so useless because the character, both Christopher Lee, obviously, but like the character itself is so rife with potential, right? Like this is Obi-Wan's master's master. He was Yoda's Padawan. Like, and he left the Order due to his disillusionment with the Senate and with the Order and with the Republic. Like, that's fascinating shit, and none of it is on screen.
No, 100%. He's like, in some ways, he's like Vader's greatest foil, but like you wouldn't know that without thinking about it.
You would never know it watching this movie. Like, there's even a deleted scene from Attack of the Clones where like it's Obi-Wan. He's looking at a bust of Dooku in the Jedi archives, and like he talks to the librarian briefly about like what a great man this was. And like he was the librarian Joe Costanu's contemporary, and like he was so admired amongst the Order, and then he left and it was a big blow, and like it's like that was cut out of this movie.
It seems pretty fucking important to me.
In favor of like, I mean, this movie is still like, it boggles my mind that these movies are all like over 2 hours long, and like so much stuff needs to happen in them, right? Because, you know, you have to set up the whole thing. There's a war going on, but George Lucas is just like, no, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to give you this 15-minute long car chase scene. I'm going to give you this very long scene in a club for no reason. I'm going to give you later, I'm going to film after we're done filming. We're going to add in this sequence of Padme and Anakin like stumbling around the droid factory because
God.
I hate that scene.
Worst part of the fucking movie by like
absolutely,
a country mile.
by such a huge margin, and you can tell that it was added in at the last minute because it just sucks and it's so long, and it's so clearly because he was like, I want to do more green screen shit, and I'm like, George, this is not what your movie is about. Like, I was just an overarching statement is like, George Lucas has given these 3 movies, right? And it was like, you have to tell the story of Darth Vader. And he was like, cool, this first movie, I'm gonna really fuck around a lot. And I'm just gonna really luxuriate in the like whole first movie and like barely set anything up. And we were like, okay, George, I guess we have to watch a lot of Jar Jar and Gungan shit. Okay.
It's so funny because like I had a significant debate with my mom in the car the other day about what percentage of Phantom Menace was about space taxes, and I'm like, Mom, the central thrust of the conflict is space taxes. Like, you just don't remember it because it's boring. And she's like, no, it couldn't have been that much. And I'm like, no, I swear to God, like the first words on the title crawl are like, there's a dispute over taxation of trade routes. Like, I swear to God, Mom, it's the whole movie.
It is like, it's not even like inherently like taxes and politics are uninteresting. Like, they can be presented in an interesting way, right? But George Lucas wants to serve as kind of everything with these movies. He wants to have like the big space opera, the political sort of, you know, intrigue and everything, but also he needs to have like the big, like the space battles and the laser swords, and like these movies. I am obviously now super invested in this universe and really enjoy like picking it apart for my own enjoyment, but like I don't understand who these movies are for. I'll be honest. Like, are they for children? They're not, because there's like war crimes and slavery in it. So like It's not really for kids, but at the same time it is, because like Jar Jar's there.
Right.
You know?
Right. I mean, like, yeah, I didn't know what the fuck was going on in any of these movies, like when I was a kid.
Like, again, I was like 17 and I could not physically watch episode 1 because it began with a bunch of space taxes and a space blockade. And I was like, no, absolutely not. I was like, I'm 17. I don't want to watch this.
I will say, and I wonder, as our resident Attack of the Clones stan, I wonder if you have like a counterfactual to me. Because for me, this is why, like, I prefer Phantom Menace to Attack of the Clones because in some ways Phantom Menace is more baffling to me. Like there's a lot of shit that's more like maybe more objectively boring to watch, but the way that like, because I guess like if I had to compare, so to me both the scenes of like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan drinking the tea, talking about like their negotiations and, you know, them sitting around in Theed, like talking about their plans or their tax routes or whatever. That's all boring. But what's more boring to me, because it's boring in a less interesting way, is like, you know, Padme on the conveyor belt, which I feel like this movie has more of. Like there's more baffling shit that's hard to wrap your head around in the first one. I feel like I don't know if you have a response to that. I'm just sort of like rattling off, but that's,
I totally understand. And it's not like I don't like the Phantom Menace. I love the Phantom Menace.
Yes.
Like I love the Phantom Menace. I love fucking whatever the fuck Liam Neeson was doing that no one else was doing. I love that shit. I'm so happy for him.
We stand the Phantom Menace around these parts.
We stand. I love every choice that Liam Neeson made and did, and his hair and the poncho. I fucking love all of it. It's excellent. He's like the worst dad in the world, and then he fucking dies. It's excellent. I love it. Like it's poetry, right? But Attack of the Clones for me is like so much more rewatchable, purely because, like, again, because George Lucas squandered that entire first installment just to kind of like, you know, like really like luxuriate in it.
Yep.
In the second one, he really has to squeeze in so much stuff. Like so much like pivotally important stuff to this universe, like foundational stuff, like turning point stuff in this universe is happening in this movie. And he does it all so poorly. It's like watching a train wreck. Like for instance, the central crux of this movie, like the main plot thing, which is like the creation of an army, right? Like that's the big deal of this movie. And
pretty big deal.
Right. And the Military Creation Act, they literally mention it by name like maybe twice in this movie. And it's literally summed up by a screenshot of Jar Jar on the Senate floor saying Dello Feligits while Yoda and Mace Windu stand in the foreground and exchange like the driest, most tired existential look that any two people, because they're like, oh, this is like the decline of our democracy, and literally it's Jar Jar in the background being like Dello Feligits, and that's it's so funny. It's so funny. It's excellent, and I can't tell if it was intentional or not. It can't be. I mean, it is, but it can't be, right? Like, it can't be intentional.
There's a solid amount of debate, and I know that Ahmed Best, is that Jar Jar's actor's name, I think?
Yes.
Because I know he's added a little fuel to the fire, because, you know, there was that theory making the rounds that the intention was to have him be evil Yoda, basically. Yeah, and act like a fool, and then, you know, it was him all along. So I mean, it's a fun theory. I don't know how much I buy it and how much is you know, Mr. Best just kind of playing along because, you know, it's fun and good for the fans and a nice positive interaction that isn't the poor man getting harassed by like crazy people. So that's something.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it like, it's such a good example of why this movie is fascinating to me, because it's not quite comedy, but it's not quite drama, but it's not even like in between. It's just some weird Frankenstein of the two where you're like, I don't know what I just watched. Like, it took me probably several watches to really absorb that that's what was happening. Like, that's the stakes of this universe that is being like summed up in that one scene, and that's wild. Like, this is literally the downfall of 1,000-year democracy.
It's funny because kind of the other side of that coin, the thing that I find the funniest, that always makes me laugh the hardest, is like the romance, which is equally important, right? Like, you know, that's the important politics like level, like world building stuff. But on a character level, like that, if that's going to be in there at all, that's a pretty important element. Like ostensibly the whole human thrust of why we're invested in these characters is like their tragic romance, but like it's not only embarrassing, but it's horrifying.
Well, okay, see, my actual argument after having watched their quote-unquote love story 6 times now is like I feel like all the pieces of the Anakin Padme relationship, like why they work and why they don't work, and why they ultimately fall apart, it's all actually in this movie. Like you do see like the foreshadowing of all of the eventual issues that will all culminate in the next movie with them in this movie. Just the actors were clearly not directed, and then the scenes were edited in such like a choppy way. Like there's no transition or like intro and outro into any of Anakin and Padme's scenes together in this movie. It's just like it's like a hard cut, and then immediately they're like in the middle of some weird conversation that you're like, I don't know if I want to be watching this. Like, this feels like a private conversation that I shouldn't be a part of.
And then 3 seconds later, we hard cut to Anakin surfing down a hog. Like
exactly.
Right, yeah. No, it's funny
also,
because
if you don't mind me jumping in really quick, it's also really rough too, because it beyond even just like hard cuts and weird jumps, there's no buildup to it. It is literally Anakin picking up from where he was as a 7-year-old, just being like, hey, you're pretty and I love you, and I'm gonna talk to you like that is just an acceptable thing to say to a person, and not the craziest fucking thing anyone has ever said to someone.
See, that doesn't even bother me, because like I actually think it is fully genius for George Lucas, because like everyone was like, who is Darth Vader gonna be, right? Like, who's Darth Vader? Like, he's gotta be like this super cool guy, and it's like, no, he's a 20-year-old fucking idiot, and his only characteristics are like loving his wife and being really good at murder and like talking really obsessively about his only friend who's like his teacher, brother, dad person. And those are his only characteristics. And I think that's awesome, actually. It's genius.
I don't disagree is the thing, but like I think it just the way mostly that it works, I guess, is the part that's wild to me.
Yeah, like it's this thing about like if you suspend like half your disbelief for the Padme Anakin romance, it like almost works, because it does play as sort of like a very cringy, you know, first love. Like they're like that couple that you knew in freshman year of college who like were really weird and really public, and like you didn't want to be around them, but they were always like in the common area for some reason. You're like, you guys, you gotta take this somewhere else. You can't do this here. Well, it's like that, but on screen.
It's such a prime example of like, because yeah, you're totally right. Like all of the pieces are there for this to work in theory as intended. Like it's obvious that, you know, the romance isn't supposed to be like 100% a straightforward, like nice thing. Like it's obvious it's supposed to be a little troubled from the get-go. The problem is George Lucas
I genuinely feel like all of the actor scenes in this movie were like first takes. Like they have to be, right?
They probably were.
Like George Lucas clearly has no interest in directing human actors. He's only interested in like weird little robots and aliens and like green screen backgrounds, right? Like that's what he was interested in, obviously. And now 20 years later we can be like, you know, man, you should have just been like concept artist for a video game and not you know, like you clearly have some interesting ideas. Like as I said, I just rewatched it right before recording, and like I was watching the gladiator fight scene. I was like, George Lucas put 1,000 more hours into like designing these weird ass alien monsters that they're supposed to fight than he did like reviewing any of the dialogue, making sure that, you know, it flowed naturally, like directing actors to move and stand and interact with each other.
I guess this is where, because I know, like, I feel a tingle in my spine that someone's going to yell at me if I don't acknowledge this. Because last week I was talking about how in a lot of modern blockbusters, and pretty much every modern blockbuster, I think, if the vast majority, if not all of them, like, the major action scenes are like prevised and like worked on before there's even anything resembling a script. And as much as I love how bold and brash the Star Wars prequels are, I feel like that's definitely a poison that if it didn't start here, it was amplified here. So I feel like I have to acknowledge this before someone like tears me apart for being a hypocrite. Because I was thinking about it, especially during that fucking factory scene. I'm like, no way this wasn't previs, like before George Lucas wrote a word.
I've seen like the behind the scenes like footage of when they literally like, oh, like at the last minute we came back and we filmed this factory sequence, and you can tell when you're watching the movie like this was just sort of jammed in there because someone was like, oh, it's not actiony enough or whatever, you know? And it's just like George Lucas just wanted to like CGI more robot things, and it's like, okay, George, but that's not like that's not the story. You know?
And it's obvious that what's so weird about George Lucas too, and why I find him so fascinating, is that like it's obvious that he cares more about, you know, making his baby toys go pew pew laser, but it's not that he doesn't care about the story.
No, like he has some really huge ideas, like big philosophies. Like he's stolen so much Eastern philosophy for this world. He's obviously invested, right? But like he's not interested in like actually fleshing it out on screen. He's just like, this is here, right? Like he was like, in the original trilogy, I like said what the Force was and like kind of what the Jedi were, and that's enough, and I don't have to do it again.
Yep. Oh man, you know, other directors like, you know, the guys who did Empire and Return of the Jedi, they were sitting around focusing on all this stinky dialogue. Like, fuck that, you know, we've got enough of that already. We're gonna do more. We need more factory scenes. I
mean, my other favorite scene in this movie, other than the Dex's Diner scene, is the Camino scenes. Because as I was telling Sean when we were watching it, like, the way they filmed that sequence was literally just to put Ian McGregor on a gigantic, empty green screen set, just fully empty, and make him, like, walk around and talk to nothing and no one, which is why, like, in those shots, his eyes are unfocused and he looks confused in every single shot. He like doesn't make eye contact with any of the Kaminoans. I mean, it works for that scene because Obi-Wan doesn't know what's going on, but he fully does not know what's going on. And it's a delight for me to watch because, I mean, I love Ewan McGregor, and I like seeing his wet, bedraggled face walking around.
Ewan McGregor in these movies is so fucking funny because he is like, everyone agrees he's like the best part of these movies. Yes. And he's like gone on the record like multiple times as just say, man, I was just reading my lines without any particular inflection.
He was like, I don't know what's going on. You're like, I can tell, Ewan. I love that about you.
It's the best. Like, can you imagine if they had tried to like for the like upcoming Obi-Wan series, they tried to recast him? People would have, you know, rioted. People would have taken to the fucking streets.
I would go to Kathleen Kennedy's house and start picketing. Are you kidding me?
I'd be right there with you. It'd be like I would not watch an Obi-Wan series.
No.
Yeah, without Ewan McGregor, and yet he very clearly was just like that meme of like, you know, Ben Affleck smoking, you know, outside on the set of Dawn of Justice, or Ian McKellen on the set of The Hobbit, like breaking into tears because this isn't acting. Like that's he's the proto Ian McKellen in that sense, but we love him all the same. Maybe because of and not in spite of that.
It's incredible that Ian McKellen got upset about The Hobbit but managed to make it through Cats. Sorry, I haven't said anything in a little while, so I had to bring it back to Cats so I could talk about things.
You have okay, I have a brain disease and it's Star Wars, but you have a real brain disease.
I don't deny this. This is well documented on the podcast as a terrible, terrible affliction. I've seen that movie 4 times. Okay, leave me alone.
God.
It's real great now that like we can make like a tier list of like who has the most diseased brain, because Sean, I hate to tell you, you're still at the bottom for cats. Like, you're still down there in the film.
Yeah, I was in the theater when Sean saw it for the first time, and it was like the rest of us was like a group of like 5 people, and the rest of us were like, oh my god, I want to die. I want to melt into the floorboards and escape. And Sean was having the fucking time of his life. He had so much life energy while we were watching Cats. Like, it's unbelievable.
I'm sure we've mentioned this on the show, but you know, for our first big post-vaccination hangout was to make our friend Kang watch fucking Cats. He hated every second of it. It was his birthday, and there was
poor Kang.
And there was the rest of us, especially Sean, going like, cats, 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 cats.
I got up and sang and danced to Skimble Shakes for a little bit.
He sure did.
God.
He's the railway cat, the cat of the railway. Coming down the line at 11:49.
Oh no, we're friends. Sean, we're friends.
We're not friends, Sean.
Oh boy, howdy.
We should keep talking about this movie, even though I'm getting to a point where I'm so sweaty from talking about Attack of the Clones.
Welcome to podcasting. I know you've done this before, but welcome to podcasting. It's such a sweaty fucking job. And people don't believe it when you say that. But you have to make your house so goddamn hot, and then you just sit in it. You just sit in it for an hour, and it sucks.
I'm so glad I don't record these in the garage anymore. Holy shit.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, listen, I know I've been kind of quiet this whole time, mostly because I've spoken to Delia and Jackson extensively about Attack of the Clones many times, so I'm mostly letting them go off and have their conversation kibitz about Attack of the Clones in every way that they are. What do you guys have left to say about it? I mean, that's really the big question.
So I'm trying to think if there are any, especially knowing that you read the novelization. I'm like, fuck, I feel like I had some burning questions about, you know, the context. I think that Dexter Jetster was the big one, and I got the best possible answer on that.
I will say the other thing about the novels is like the last maybe 45 minutes to an hour of this movie, starting from like all of the Camino stuff, or not the Camino stuff, the Geonosis stuff, the factory stuff, the big fight, the duel with Dooku, all of that in the novelization is compressed down into like literally 3 chapters at most. At the end.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I did actually want to ask about that, because that is probably like my big why I find revisiting this to be less of a hoot, because I feel like I love the look of like the Quake looking like Geonosis castle, but once we get there and we go full like it's time to just barf up CGI battles for the rest of the movie, and we're not as much in the meme zone of like we're gonna chase, you know, Elon Sleaze-Bagano around this dingy bar for no reason, and like all the romance memes and like all that stuff's done, and it's basically just action at that point, and that's fine. Like it's weird because I feel like Phantom Menace is a pacing nightmare, but a lot of that is because of just how much like boring shitty tax dialogue there is. By the time we get to the end battle, like I remember feeling surprised when I rewatched that. I'm like, that was not nearly as long as and exhausting as I remember it being, but this was. So I'm not surprised that they condensed that for the novels. It's like, are you going to describe every individual lightsaber blow from Kit Fisto?
You can tell at the end the author was like, I'm done with this. I'm just going to like word for word write down what was in the screenplay. I'm done. I'm like, you know what? I respect that, because I do admit, like, all of like the last action stuff, it's not that interesting, especially to rewatch. But yeah. I do find it kind of fascinating. Like, I really like the Colosseum sequence. I like all of that.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
I kind of like the tragedy of all those Jedi dying in the Colosseum. I like the clones showing up for some reason, and no one was like, hey, what's that? And they were just like, cool.
Sick. We got stormtroopers now.
Sick. I mean, like, again, like, George Lucas was like, I have so much stuff I need to do in this movie. One, because in A New Hope, I just wrote the words Clone Wars in the dialogue without thinking about it, and now I have to go and, like, actually do it, so I'm gonna have to do a whole subplot about that, which, like, that's never even they were just like, oh, this clone army was commissioned by a Jedi who's dead now? Weird. And we never touched on it again.
That was so confusing to me as a kid.
It's confusing now. I've watched it so many times. They were like, Master Sifo Dyas commissioned this army 10 years ago. Isn't he dead? Yeah. Okay. This is our army now. Like, Obi-Wan literally shows up and they're like, hey, here's an army. Here's like the 10 million identical men that you ordered. And he's like, what? Okay. And then he calls Yoda and he's like, oh, I got 10 million identical human men here. And Yoda's like, cool.
Well, it's because I'll tell you what I thought as a kid, because this didn't make any sense. I have read some behind the scenes thing. I think it's been a hot minute, so I might be misremembering this. But as a kid, I remember I was so confused. I was really hung up on who the fuck Sifo Dyas was, because I thought it was Qui-Gon, because they mentioned like, oh, around 10 years ago. That would have been around the time Qui-Gon was alive. Like, is this supposed to be
that would almost make sense, huh?
I know, but like I just couldn't do it. Apparently, the original explanation was even stupider. If I recall correctly, I read that the original plan was that, like, instead of having Master Sifo Dyas be someone who was like, you know, couldn't have placed the order because, you know, he was dead and like leave that mystery. Apparently, there was never supposed to be a Master Sifo Dyas, and it was just supposed to be like Sifo Dyas, Sidious. Like we're just supposed to make that connection, which would have been hilariously dumb on like a second grader level.
Yeah, I think in the current canon, Sifo Dyas was a real Jedi. He had, like, visions of the Republic falling apart, and he was like, I gotta get an army in here, and the rest of the Jedi were like, hey, what the fuck are you talking about? No. And then he went and did it anyway, and then Dooku killed him, and then and then hired Jango to be the template for the army, and just did that, I guess, and none of that is really ever addressed properly, ever.
I mean, they really are just like, hey, we got clones now.
Yeah, they were like,
sick.
Okay, we got some clones. And to be fair, okay, my real thing is that, like, at least it was Jango Fett. At least it was Tamora Morrison, who is a very attractive man, and not like some ugly ass white dude. Thank God. Thank God, right? Like, that's the only saving grace, is that there are like millions of Tamora Morrisons running around this universe. And that's I would live in that universe for that reason.
I have a pitch for you though. Like, what turbo memes would it have been if like the template for all the stormtroopers was actually like Danny DeVito? You know what I mean? Like,
oh god,
that's a pretty good pitch.
Thousands of identical Danny DeVitos walking on.
These are the peak of human performance. These are clones that have been engineered for combat.
You might not like it, but this is what the peak performance looks like.
Christ.
Man, Jango just gets taken for such a character that like has a lot of focus and screen time. He really does just get blown the fuck out. Like, after a not very good fight scene, and then Mace Windu just gets him. Yeah,
I try to imagine. Obviously, I don't have the experience of like watching it come out in real time, but I just imagine like this. Having Jango is, I guess, cool because it gives you Boba Fett's story. Like, it's cool that Boba Fett's a clone, I guess. That's a cool thing to add, I guess. But then Jango gets fridged so confusingly. He's so confusingly utilized in this movie. He's just, like, there, and then he and Obi-Wan stare at each other in a very sexually charged way for several seconds, and that's, like, their entire interaction. And then they have to fight, and then he gets his head cut off after saying nothing else in this movie. I'm just sad for him, you know?
I mean, this is another thing. I think that one of the reasons in my mind this was like the worst one is that even as a kid, I remember there were a lot of things about this movie that I wouldn't have had the language to like identify as like a screenwriting problem or whatever, but just stuff that as a kid, you know, I'd see like Jango Fett and he's built up as like a major character. And it's like, oh, wow, like here's a cool jetpack guy. And then he just gets got. And like, because, you know, I keep in mind, you know, I was like 7. My mom had made me watch the original trilogy, but I wasn't, you know, I was too young to really get super into them. Like it'd take me a little while before I did. Was a little older. I didn't really get super into Star Wars until Revenge of the Sith came out. And like, so I didn't realize that the whole point was like, if you're just watching it as a movie, just like, you know, 1, 2, 3, it makes it look like Jango Fett's like gonna be some sort of character, and then it's like, well, no, he really only matters because Boba Fett's a character who's also not really that important, but he's popular, so we got to put him in there. So like, it was just, I remember like I guess that's why I'm fixating on this so much now. Being like, as a kid, I'm like, wait, he's gone? Like what?
Yeah, classic dad fridging for the sake of Boba Fett's, I guess, previously unknown tragic history. I mean, I guess from my perspective, like, I'm very excited for the Boba Fett show later this year. I'm excited, obviously, for the Obi-Wan show next year. Actually, yeah, to be perfectly, when the Obi-Wan show drops, like, I'm gone. That's my life now. I'm going to ascend from this plane of existence.
Respect.
Like, if you hear hollering next year from the distance, that's me.
I can't judge. I bought like 10 boxes of Eggo waffles and like locked my apartment door and didn't come out because Breath of the Wild came out over spring break, and I ate nothing but Eggo waffles so I could keep playing it. So that was respect. I could dig it.
It's not even the most degenerate thing anyone on this podcast has eaten for a week straight, and it was in service of something. What a concept. That's not to imply that one of us on here would have eaten nothing but Fun Dip for a week because that's what they had. No.
How did you not have like a kidney stone from that?
We asked this question all. I mean, Sean, are you like a lich? Have you been dead all along?
I'll never tell.
I was gonna say, like, I didn't meet you till college. You theoretically could be.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the long con.
I am powered by sugar and hatred.
You're like Sephiroth, but instead of being sealed in a crystal, you're sealed in a giant sticky honey, like amber crystal of sugar.
Bury me. No, listen. When I die, I want to be cocooned in a giant lick'em stick from Fun Dip. Just put me in that.
Oh man. You know, it can be like a tourist attraction. You have the little kids like come see the world's largest Fun Dip stick, and you know, you even are allowed to look at it until one of them like licks too much and like sees your cracks through the layer of decaying skull like a Tootsie Pop.
See, or alternatively, to tie it back into Star Wars, we do a Han frozen in carbonite look through it.
Oh.
There we go. We've solved the issue. We haven't solved anything. I've sidetracked us. I apologize.
That's fine.
That's okay. I don't think I have that much more to say about this movie other than the fact that I could keep talking about this movie, but I won't. I maintain that this is a hilarious movie to watch. I have a good time every single time I watch it. And I know it's partially just that I enjoy things that are bad in a very harmless kind of way, which is what this movie is.
Yeah.
It's harmless, and it is almost boring in certain parts of it, just because the thing that fascinates me about this movie, again, is that so much pivotal stuff has to happen in it, but it's all presented in such a, like, dog bringing a dead bird to you kind of way. Like, and just kind of dropping it on your patio, and you're like, huh, okay. Like, this is different, right? This isn't what I was expecting. It's different, and it's maybe interesting. It's not, like, dramatic or consequential the way that I feel like it should be, but it's something. It's definitely something.
No, it's funny, yeah, because our positions are definitely much closer than I would have expected based on the initial pitch of, Attack of the Clones is the best one, actually, was the pitch I was sold. But no, I mean, I basically completely agree. I love how batfuck crazy this movie is, and it's tremendous memes. I've always thought it's tremendous memes, or at least like since I was old enough to register the concept of like watching a movie as a bit. Basically, I thought this movie was a good bit. Really, the only meaningful difference is that like my go-to bit movie is definitely Phantom Menace with this particular franchise, and there are movies in the series I unironically like enough to, prefer over this. But no, like this is, I can't disagree with basically anything you've said.
I would say that Phantom Menace would be kind of like this for me if it didn't have a very sad death scene at the end for me.
Fair.
And like same with Revenge of the Sith. Like if those two movies didn't end in like horrible tragedy for my favorite man, my favorite terrible fruit man, I would prefer watching them, maybe. But this is just, again, so much shit happens in this movie, and it's all really stupid, but extremely important. And I unironically do think that it sets up Anakin's fall fairly decently. I mean, in as much as like George Lucas is willing to like, sacrifice the screen time to actual sort of plot, and character work, which isn't that much.
To go for the scope, like I think in hindsight, especially these days, the thing that I think we all kind of subconsciously realize, and that in order to do a story like the prequels justice with that level of scope across like that many years, portraying, a society in collapse and all that, like this would probably need to be like a Game of Thrones length like season of television at least, in order to flesh out all those elements and all of those characters. As it is, like, it definitely was bold to be like, here's Anakin as he's 9 years old. Oh wait, 10 years later he's basically a completely different character. We got to set up everything for his downfall right the fuck now.
Yeah, again, like, George Lucas really luxuriated in that first movie. He was like, this isn't really about Anakin. Like, Anakin shows up, like, we see him, but like, it's not really about Anakin. He's just kind of there. He's just this fucky little kid, and he's right there. And you're like, okay, what's this movie about? And he's like, shh. And he never answers you.
It's so funny because it's not even really about Obi-Wan either. Like,
it's literally about Qui-Gon, and then he dies. It's the worst. Like, if George Lucas had actually outlined what he wanted to do with this trilogy before he had started filming it, maybe you would have done the 10 years before, stuff like set up, but that wouldn't have been a full movie. That might have been like the first section of that first movie, and then you could do a time skip and you could like spend more time in this universe and setting up like what the actual stakes are, which he never does.
I still can't wrap my head around what the, like, when the Trade Federation was there and, providing all their droids, I'm like, no, they didn't, like, join us. They didn't join a civil war just because they're mad about Padme, like, rocking their shit. Did they? And, like, that as it kept going, I'm like, they really did? Oh,
they really, God. I mean, ostensibly, it's about, like, capitalism, and they want to, like, do more capitalist stuff without the regulations of a democratic system, but none of that's actually there. Like, it's all like subtextual stuff.
The only thing Gunray can ask is why Padme is still alive, and every second I'm like, no fucking way.
It's like, you can't spend 10 years angry at a girl. You can't. You can't. 10-year-old girl. You can't. It's not possible. But, like, actually one of my biggest pet peeves, I think one of the biggest failings of the prequel trilogy as a whole is that George Lucas has not spent enough time setting up really what the Jedi Order is and like what their function is in this universe, like how they operate, what the actual like stakes are with them joining this war and fighting in it. And then it's why now there's so many toxic Star Wars fans who are like, actually, the Jedi deserve their genocide because so much of it is presented through Anakin's perspective on like what the Jedi are and how he feels restrained in the Order. Like it's like they're Star Wars fans who look at the Jedi Order, which is basically like a, cobbled version of Buddhist, spirituality and philosophy, and they're like, is this a cult? Hey, is this a cult? It's like, no, you're just Americans, and George Lucas didn't explain what this is.
George Lucas also didn't help matters. Like, I think people really get hung up, and it is a little fucked. They get really hung up on in the first one when Anakin's 9, and they're like, yo, you're too old, and it's like, excuse me? So I like, and especially because we end up, because we don't really see the Jedi Order. They're not in it, aside from Qui-Gon. Like, they're not in the Phantom Menace very much, so we don't really get to see them in their role as like peacekeepers, whatever that means. So like, it really does with the rest of the movies. It really does come across as like, yo, we need them child soldiers, baby.
I mean, I'm coming from the perspective where I have seen all of the Clone Wars, which does a very good job, I think, of sort of filling in that, 3-year time skip between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Like, they do it. That show is, I honestly think it is necessary to understanding this universe, like as it stands right now, like the current canon and everything. Yeah. Because if you just watch this trilogy, it feels like an entirely different thing. It feels like a much less deep, like, universe. And, I mean, honestly, the reason that I got really invested in Star Wars is because Dave Filoni really buys into that found family trope and really sold me hard on it. And I watched all of his fucking shows that are all just like, some idiots find a baby and have to keep this baby. And I'm like, yeah, I'm down. I love that shit,
That's sort of the benefit of this sort of like, we can talk about the commodification of like movies and franchising and the death of creativity, capitalism, and we have, and we will continue to do so. But there are benefits to it that when you have like a lunatic like George Lucas, like, God, I wish I could remember the exact word that you use, but is, throwing his brain vomit up there for us to see, basically. And then you can have, shows like Clone Wars, teams of artists and talented people to be like, all right, this is interesting. Let's try and make something sensible out of this. Let's see if we can use this as a foundation. And, that's really cool. So we get that at least.
Yeah. I mean, the Clone Wars are genuinely fascinating. They flesh out, especially like Anakin's perspective, because I will say that I think one of the most genuinely like interesting things that comes out of episode 2 is you see this side of Anakin where he understands like Jedi philosophy, like he can recite it. He talks to Padme about attachment versus love versus possession and all of that, and he can say it, right? Like he obviously he understands these tenets of this order that he is a part of, but he also does not, he holds himself outside of it. He doesn't apply those theories necessarily to himself. Like Anakin thinks that he's very special. He thinks that he is the chosen one. Mm-hmm. He thinks that he's the exception to the rule. And that's like the crux of his character turn, right? Is that when push comes to shove, he can't do the Jedi thing. Like he can't make the sacrifice. He can't actually buy into the philosophy. And Clone Wars does this well, where they, the Clone Wars, the main crux of the Clone Wars is they give, Anakin a Padawan of his own, and you see him teaching her, and he, like, is a good teacher. He can do it. He's fighting this war, he's teaching this child, and he can do those things admirably, but then when it's time to apply those ideas to him, he obviously can't.
That's actually really interesting because I knew about that character. I knew Ahsoka, right? That's her name? Because I knew about that character and, like, you know, she showed up in The Mandalorian, but I hadn't actually watched the Clone Wars. So I'd always wondered about that. I'd always wondered, like, is the fact that, like, it was Anakin just the worst teacher?
No, and I mean, I will also, the incongruity of Anakin in Attack the Clones versus Anakin then in the Clone Wars is like, he's voiced by like a 30-year-old man. He sounds like he's 30 years old, but you have to remember that he's still like a 20-year-old kid. But he, like Anakin in the series, like you see him grappling with applying Jedi tenets to himself and then also being under the stress of, you know, being actively in a war and dealing with all of that shit at the same time. And he does okay, right? Like, he's a pretty good Jedi. He's a good general. He's a good teacher. But, like, you see also those, like, points of tension where keeping the secret about his marriage, and especially in his relationship to Padme, he can't, like, all of his sort of the bad possessive qualities start to show. And, like, that, I feel like that series is so important to understanding, like, their relationship dynamic.
This sounds super base. This sounds real great. Maybe I should give it a watch. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend. I think that basically all the Star Wars TV shows are better than any Star Wars movie. Like, the Clone Wars and Rebels especially, I think that they are really solid shows, well put together shows, and none of the movies, I think, quite live up to them, unfortunately.
Damn. Well, it's, you know, I don't think that is as hot of a take as it maybe once would have been.
No, I think that's kind of a common take these days.
Yeah. Well, great.
I think we need to be done.
Yeah, I think we're done.
I refrained from talking too much about Obi-Wan even, which is admirable of me. So, like, I think we have to be done because maybe I'll save that. Maybe I'll come back when the Obi-Wan show drops and it'll just be an hour of me screaming uninterrupted. Because that's what that's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring us back together. I hope that everyone had a grand time listening to Jackson and Delia understand themselves and Star Wars a bit better. I know I did. I have been largely quiet except for my occasional quip about cats because I can't go an episode without making a fool of myself in some capacity. This was an easy episode for me to sit silently, and I chose not to. So, Delia, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for talking to us about just the chaotic world of Star Wars Episode 2. This has been a wonderfully fascinating episode.
Thank you for having me, and I will come back anytime to talk about Star Wars, for sure.
We will absolutely be keeping that in our back pockets.
Wonderful.
I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda.
I've been Jackson Keller. You can find me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. Buy my book, Kelly is Unbreakable, Amazon.com.
Delia, we've offered, is there anything you would like to pitch? A Twitter account? Anything to follow? Anything?
No, I am not online.
You are making the correct decision.
I was gonna say, just coming out with all the right takes today.
Follow the podcast at BADH_cast on Twitter. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. We got a bunch of bonus episodes on that backlog that you should absolutely check out. We've got a new one coming out Monday or Tuesday-ish of next week. We're still hitting August. Don't you worry about that. And also, a shout out to our $10 patrons.
Thank you so much. Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Summer, y'all are wonderful.
Thank you so much. And also thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. Buy their music, stream their music, support them, whatever. Bandcamp, Spotify, all those good places. Go do it. Also, thanks to 25yearslaterstate.com. There's a little button of us in the corner that you can click on, but you should absolutely check out a lot of really talented people doing a lot of really talented writing all over that website. Fantastic stuff. Go read it. Next week, As I said, we're going to be talking about The Dark Knight Rises. Is it as bad as Jackson remembers? Is it as forgettable as I remember? Because I don't remember shit about that movie. We'll find out. Until next time, bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go